Hello everybody, thank you for joining me, Chris Hattingh, researcher at the Free Market Foundation, on my latest solo podcast. And this week I wanted to talk about Venezuela and socialism, collectivism, and any possible lessons South Africa can learn from the tragedy that happened and is continuing to happen in that South American country. My topic this week is prompted by an article in the Financial Mail by Sikonathi Mantshantsha, and he writes on lessons for South Africa's voters from Venezuela. Now, just to give you some history for those who might not know, in 1999 Hugo Chavez was elected, and during the election process he promised to nationalize the land and key industries in Venezuela, and he would start with the oil business. He promptly changed the constitution to allow this, and in 2001 the first piece of land was expropriated from a listed British food producer. And we know that since then things have gone dramatically downhill, just as they have in Zimbabwe, just north of the border of South Africa. Now, many populist politicians, and I use the word populism because that's thrown around so much nowadays, I think it's simply another synonym for socialist, populist politicians, because they all think in terms of groups, either race groups or class groups or whatever arbitrary group they want to put people in. They all promise people certain things, that the government will do things for them. Either they're going to give them healthcare, food, land, take your pick. I think Sikonathi's article is very timely because we have the elections coming up in May, and to me elections are pretty much simply, they're a competition between parties to decide, and the winner of the competition gets to choose where the wealth of the state gets redistributed. And we know that the wealth of the state, it's not its own, it's simply taxes that it collects from its citizens. The state does not produce wealth on its own. The only resources it has as such is what we give them in the form of taxes. Though without that they can't really do anything. So elections are simply a contestation to decide who's going to get what from the party which wins. I know that might be sort of sad assessment of things, but I think that fundamentally and philosophically, at least in South Africa, is what it boils down to. People tend to vote for the party which promises to do the most for them, instead of focusing on the party which promises to step back the most, to extract the tentacles of the state from our lives. My background is in philosophy, and that's sort of my bias where I come from. But I really do think that ideas and ideologies and philosophies determine the course in which societies run. And I think South Africa at present is very much collectivist. All of the parties are premised on the notion that government has a central role to play in our lives, and whichever group happens to find itself in power of government will decide who gets what, and sort of the path that the country takes. Whereas ideally, you would want a party that would promise to, and then again, how far do you believe promises and how far do you go with them? But you would want a party who would at least nominally promise to roll back the power of the state and how much control it has over our lives. We can look at different policies, for example, expropriation without compensation, the national minimum wage, onerous labor legislation, and the national health insurance. These are all different ways for the state to increase its power over us. The competition commission is another example, because that decides who conducts fair business and who conducts unfair business, and what punishments should be meted out. So all of these things place the state at the center and don't place the individual at the center. That's unfortunately the reality we have right now. Just to go back to Venezuela. We know that, I think since the weekend, they've had rolling blackouts. And in South Africa, just today, Eskom announced stage 1 load shedding from 11 o'clock this morning, I think, this Thursday morning, Thursday the 14th of March. So Eskom, I think, is just if you look at it this way, it's an earlier iteration of what is now happening in Venezuela. I think it will inevitably lead that way, because Eskom is a state-backed monopoly. There are no consequences for its failures. It will keep on getting bailed out. There's no competition. There's no reason for it to incentivize, for it to improve its efficiency and its service delivery. The state will simply keep on bailing it out. And of course, politicians want to keep Eskom around, because it's another way of garnering votes, is by saying, vote for us, we'll keep Eskom going, and without Eskom you won't have electricity, so what are you going to do without us if you vote for a different party, for example. Earlier this week I was interviewed on Talk Radio 702 and on SAFM on the subject of Eskom and potential privatization and these sorts of things. And I also tried to make the point there that we see these different things, Eskom, the corruption scandal, state capture, all these big issues in the media and in the news. We get very upset, and we want commissions of inquiry and investigations and different board members. We want board members to be fired, and we want 5-year plans and these sorts of things. But we're not addressing the underlying philosophy of all these things, which is collectivism, which is the state at the center. Now, I wonder what it's going to take for us to realize this. I don't know if it's a simple matter of education, if things are going to have to get really bad for people to wake up, and then we see sort of a 180 in terms of philosophy, and maybe more of a focus, or at least some focus, on individualism. South Africa has always been dominated by collectivist ideas and philosophies. That's probably why the country has sort of lurched from problem to problem. It is a miracle. South Africa is in many ways a miracle, that the fact that it's still standing. But I don't think we should be so, I don't want to say pretentious, but so arrogant that we think South Africa will buck the trend of what's happened to other socialist countries. For example, Venezuela. In his article, the author Sikonathi tries to make the point that South Africa needs smarter voters, politicians who tell us that they're going to redistribute wealth from a certain group and give it to other people are simply trying to garner votes. And I want to quote Sikonathi. He says, "Stealing from the rich will not make the poor richer," end quote. Now that to me hits the nail on the head. Just redistributing wealth doesn't mean there's anything being done in terms of wealth creation. And if the state is in charge of so much of an economy, eventually the wealth is going to run out. There's no two ways about it. Ayn Rand, the philosopher, writer, I guess she considered herself more of a writer than a philosopher, but she herself, one of her sayings was that she simply said, A is A. Eskom is simply bankrupt. The country is heading towards ruin. Socialism simply fails. A is A. We can't wish it away. We can't want things to be different. We can try and influence things, but that is the reality right now, and we have to acknowledge that. We can see what's happening in Venezuela. We can see what's happened in Zimbabwe. So either you let reality be your judge of these things from a purely pragmatic point of view, be your judge of what works and what doesn't. From a non-pragmatic point of view, from sort of a, what's the correct word, from an idealistic, maybe moralistic point of view, socialism will always fail because it's anti-human nature. It's anti, humans as such. For people to live as they see fit, as they deem best, for them to use their minds, to use the resources around them, to live their lives for themselves as they deem best, they need to be free. Any system which is based on force is diametrically opposed to individual freedom. If in any nominal way you value individual freedom, you will be against any collectivist form of running a society and a country, be it socialism or fascism. Take your pick. To me, they're all inherently collectivist and will all eventually lead to the same outcomes. They all become, it simply becomes a matter of one group fighting against another group to be in charge of the state, because the state is the ultimate concentration of political power and force in a society. And when you have a society that's based on the use of force, these groups are always going to contest each other and try to see who can win. So I think I very much appreciate articles like Sikonathi's in the mainstream media. I think he raises very important points. I would encourage you to go and read it. You can either get it in the Financial Mail hard copy or online. But just make sure before the election that you very clearly read each party's manifesto and whether there's any talk about individual freedom and individual liberty, and then sort of hedge your bets, I suppose, and decide if it's worth, one over the other, and what issues are the most important to you when you're driving home from work, maybe this afternoon, and listening to this podcast, or at home, and your lights go out as a result of load shedding, know that that is the result of socialism. Ideas have real world effects and consequences. It's not simply people talking about these things in ivory towers and that sort of thing. You can see the effects of socialism, collectivism in your life day to day by these failures of the state. So I hope that you've enjoyed this podcast, that there's some things for you to think about and talk about. Please leave your comments below, and please share this podcast on all your different social media platforms. Please follow the FMF on Facebook and Twitter. And I look forward to talking to you again next week. Bye.